Now is the moment to decide if you are pro-peace or not. Those are the words of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, responding to Donald Trump's attack on Iranian General Soleimani while he was in Baghdad last night. This is an incredibly important series of tweets by Ocasio-Cortez because it outlines, I feel, a cogent response to Donald Trump and a commitment to peace and an understanding about how, war-based narratives are formed and how when countries do go to war, the people who bear the brunt of that decision are often the most marginalized and distanced from that actual decision being made. And I want to explore this with you because I feel it's an incredibly important illustration about how we have to communicate to people why what Donald Trump did was dangerous and why peace must be the path forward, and how if it's not the path forward, the suffering that will happen will not be borne by the rich and wealthy and well-connected. So AOC right off the top is correct. This was an act of war. This, because it was an act of war, is not something Donald Trump should be able to do or should do on his own. The declaration of war is a power that belongs to the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. It doesn't belong to the president. The president has immense power and say with regard to how U.S. foreign policy operates. And that's probably a good thing. That person needs to have immense power and immense sway in terms of how they respond to actions on a day-to-day basis. That's why it's called the executive branch. But the declaration of war is a serious, history-altering, life-changing moment for an entire country. And as such, it's too much power for one person. It's too much power for the White House and the Pentagon on their own. That's why it needs to belong with Congress. So AOC is 100% right in noting that whatever happens, whether you support Trump's action or not, whether you support escalation or not, whether you support a ramping up or not, because this was an act of war, congressional oversight is needed. 100%. But she's also right in noting that this is going to be one of those moments where if you declare yourself to be pro-peace or anti-war, that you're going to be called naive, or you're going to be barraged by people saying, well, what Donald Trump did was rash and maybe inelegant, but at the end of the day, Soleimani was the bad guy, Iran is the bad guy, it's too late for a peaceful solution, we have no choice but to engage in a formalized conflict, and on and on and on. And AOC again was 100% right in noting that this is exactly what they did in Iraq. They said there was no alternative. They fabricated information. They fabricated narratives. They fabricated the entire motivation of a war to make that war happen. And it was a combination of war hawks in government and in media and in industry and in finance who had a vested interest in making that happen. And sadly, they fooled most of America's elected officials. And they fooled a lot of the public. And they fooled much of the media. And the result was a war that solved nothing and led to millions of people suffering, if not worse. That was a mistake. This could very well be another one of those mistakes. And I fear that if that mistake happens with regard to Iran, the devastation could be orders of magnitude worse on both sides, for Iranians and Americans and anybody else caught in the crossfire. AOC is 100% right to note that it is not too late, that through protest, through congressional oversight, through media literacy, through an honest analyzation of what happened here, that we can avoid escalated conflict, that we can avoid a war, we can avoid what happened in Iraq, we can avoid all of that. There's still that opportunity. Don't let anybody tell you that that opportunity has come and gone. But AOC also makes one final and fantastic point, that this type of war is class conflict. If there is to be war, if there is to be conflict with Iran, the people who face the brunt of that will not be Donald Trump, will not be Donald Trump's children, will not be the elite generals, will not be the media heads at the biggest media corporations, will not be the war-backing senators and congresspeople and their children. Overwhelmingly, the people who will suffer are working class people who serve in the military. The sort of poor and working class people who enlist in the military, they will be the ones that face the consequences. Poor people will be the ones that face the consequences. In Iran, it'll be the most vulnerable people in Iran that face the consequences. People who, whether you liked Soleimani or not, have no real say in what that man did or didn't do. Right? At the end of the day, people who aren't making the decisions here will be the ones that face the consequences of that decision. And so it's incumbent upon all those, whether they're in formal, government power, they're presidents or Congress people or senators, or whether they have informal power via media, whether it's independent media or whether it's formalized, mainstream media, all of us who won't really bear the consequences because of our age or our class or what have you, need to be extra careful in assuring that if conflict does need to happen, that every alternative was explored and exhausted before that. Because it is not us putting it on the line. It's not the biggest corporations and the richest people putting it on the line. In many ways, they seek to profit from the suffering of others in this conflict on both sides. So to close, it's important to realize that AOC's words in this moment have real weight. The war that may come from this is not set in stone. Donald Trump's actions need to be constrained, not only by congressional oversight, but by a critical media and an engaged and vigilant public. And ultimately, we have to fight against escalated conflict because those who will bear the brunt of it do not deserve to and do not have any say whether or not it happens. And if we believe in a just and dignified existence for the American working class, then we can't continue to send them into wars like Iraq and like a potential conflict with Afghanistan that is about nothing more than political gain and economic gain for the rich and wealthy and well-connected, and insecurity and fear and suffering for almost everybody else.